Quickly about me, I'm a game designer, but that is kind of an umbrella term. I'm interested in a lot of game design aspects. I do a lot of market research. I'm interested in scaling and growth of games, analytics, data-driven design, and also like the product side of all that. I've worked on 15 games that are currently active, and on a few more that are not active anymore, having more than 100 million downloads since 2016. I've been fortunate enough to work on various genres of games. I've worked on all of it, like hyper casual and kids games and puzzles and dice and cards and shooter games. And lately, I'm working on strategy games slash kingdom builders at A Thinking Ape, a company based in Vancouver. I moved here 7 months ago with my family to work for Thinking Ape. So I'm gonna start here with a cliche of what do game designers design, because I've seen it more than a few times that people outside of the industry usually do not understand what game designers design. And the most common answers you'll get are like that the game designers design 3D characters or weapons or physics of the objects or something like that. This is like mostly wrong. And while game designers do have some input of how these things are done, their primary focus are other things. And people from inside the industry will usually tell you that game designers design core game loops and progression curves and in-game economies and stuff like that. And this is mostly correct, but these are just means to an end, because the most fundamental thing here is that designers design experiences. And how this experience affects your users basically determines the successfulness of your game. And this picture on the right is from The Art of Game Design by Jesse Schell. And it's how it opens the chapter. And some 550 pages later, you have the picture on the right, which is what everything you have to take into consideration when you're designing a game and how to do it properly. But the most tricky part here is that you design an experience, but the experience, it's not your experience. The experience is in the mind of the user. And to do that, there are a lot of different approaches to do that, because there are a lot of different categories and genres of games. So, for example, here at Thinking Ape, we build communities. That's our company mantra, and the company is built on the pillars of ownership, having wonderful arguments, best ideas win, and keep growing, maybe the most important one. So they've been doing this for more than 12 years. They've noticed early on that building communities through games is a good thing. It helps your games to live for years and years, and the products needs to just evolve and iterate as the market evolves. And while they are kingdom builder games, some of our long-standing products, like for example Party in My Dorm, aren't even considered like 4X strategy games, because they've evolved into something different over the years. And all our games require long-term engagement, so most systems are built to provide just that. But just to take a step back here, this is just one example of a direction that a gaming company can go in. And speaking in general, successful games point of view is we have a company side point of view and a user side point of view, and both of them need to work. So the company side is obviously it should be profitable, and in our case it should be scalable. While, for example, most hyper casual games don't need to be scalable. they don't even measure 30-day retention because they don't even expect you to play the game after 30 days, mostly. So basically, where I start to find out how games manage to do both of these things is market research and market intelligence. And there's a lot to do here, and there are all of these things on the top right bottom of the screen, which are like microtrends, geolocation, genres, mechanics, what platforms, what are the ad trends, and basically connect all of the above. But before I get into examples for these, we're going to take a look at what's happening with free-to-play games in 2020. And basically, this taxonomy is like the best fit on the market. It comes from Game Refinery. It's a company, they're based in Finland, I think. And what they do is they apply this taxonomy and provide further research. Like, the main four categories are obviously casual and mid-core and sports and driving and casino, because they address different audiences. Then you have these genres of puzzle, arcade, and hyper-casual, and then you have the subgenres, which is like a lot of them. Currently, there are 53 of them, and basically these cover everything that's on the free-to-play mobile market currently. So to go back on the trends example, like understanding this would be like macro trends usually stretch over several years, and like the current trends and findings are that player versus player games grow extremely well. As a matter of fact, I did research 2 years ago, and their growth factor was literally 3 times better than other games. Or another example is that mid-core meta elements find their way into casual games, making them monetize even better. So with the market maturation, we have this crossover of elements of games that support each other. Microtrends, like the latest example is that Monopoly games perform very well lately, and you can leverage this like no matter what genre or what audience you're in. So obviously board games that do Monopoly perform really well lately, but also you can apply this mechanic to casual games. You can put it as a side thing, or even like mid-core strategy games, for example, like Rise of Kingdoms added a small Monopoly gambling thing into their store when they noticed that this trend is performing well. Geolocation trends is like, for example, to know the essential differences between the Eastern and the Western markets. These are very different markets when you see like user behavior and gamers. Like the main like separation here is that like the Eastern markets are more mid-core heavy, while the Western markets are more casual heavy. Genre trends is all of those genres we saw on the previous page, is how basically they're different and they have different KPI benchmarks. For example, retention benchmarks are very different for strategy games versus hyper-casual games, or CPIs, or basically ARPDAU. Anything is pretty different in different genres of games. So basically you need to know these benchmarks in order to apply them to your game and grow your game successfully. Mechanics trends is also a very important one, and the latest example is that idle mechanics enhance performance in all genres. idle games like those incremental tapper games started as their own genre, but soon enough, every kind of game that's adding idle mechanics into their game basically experiences better performance. Platform trends are like what previous speakers mostly said, is different trends there. Like Android's users perform better lately due to sheer volume of users, and they have cheaper CPI versus the iOS users, while the iOS users still have a high, like are considered like a high value users, especially in mid-core games. Ad trend example would be like how those, I'm sure every one of us have seen them on Facebook and all of the platforms, misleading ads that have nothing to do with the game except for the art, and they look the same, but like the mechanics are totally different. It's a totally different game, but you're getting this misleading ad that's like tries to get you in the game. And it's been years, and marketers were saying that like that doesn't work and it's like bad for your game, but 2019 was just full of them, and they like took over the market with those kind of ads. This is another example for gaming categories that I did. It's a bit of older research, but on the left-hand pie chart, you can actually see of all top 800 games on iOS in USA, what was the percentage of them that were like newcomers, like games not older than 18 months, versus what were the old games that are there as top performers. And I've been following this number for years, and basically it's shrinking. Like 5 years ago, it was close to 27%. Today, it will be probably less than 20%. So on the other graph, you have all the different types of games, and basically what was their growth. Like the green part is their growth of games that got into the top grossing charts. And obviously they all work. You just need to be aware of these metrics and know like the games you make, the games you design, what's their market space, where can you enter that market space, how can you enter that market space, and so on. Another recent research that I did is like what's the country mix for our games, and this chart basically shows where the downloads came from in all of 2019 on the top grossing strategy games. And it basically shows what was the country mix that the user acquisition people are using in order for their games to have like this top performance thing. So basically this chart looked completely different like 2 years ago, with USA hitting 60 to 65% of the pie chart. But with the rise of the Android and smarter UI experiments, games have even higher revenues with these new mixes of countries while having lower CPIs. And like the younger game, the newer games of this genre that enter the market are obviously putting more focus on user acquisition, for in this example on Russia, Mexico, and Turkey. And it was weird at the beginning, but later you can actually see that it's a different user base, and these players bring in different things into your game. So, for example, Russian and Turkish players, while not being very populated with big spenders, bring higher engagement in your game. They're very competitive and very focused long term. So they actually make your game healthier long term. Question: is this pie chart for number of installs or IP revenue per country? No, this pie chart that you're seeing right now on the screen is number of installs. And where do those installs come from? Which countries? And what's their percentage in the mix? And IP revenue would be this, per game, which games performed best on those charts. Right. So basically, this is a huge theme in user experience design and how to design for the market. So if you have any questions, now would be the time. I left more space for questions. Because this is more like a 3-day talk instead of 30 minutes. So I just got some latest examples that I've been using. So basically, I have another question. What's the biggest trend at the moment? What game genre would be the next big thing? So the biggest trend, there is no biggest trend at the moment. There are separate trends in these 4 categories. They all have their own trends. And basically, in the last 3 years, casual games and mid-core games have performed equally well, while mid-core games have a very small user base, but a very high-spending players, while the casual games have a very high user base, whereas there are not as many whales in there. And sports and driving are just sharing those, and casino is a whole separate category. But yeah, for example, in mid-core, RPGs have performed the best lately, because they're managing to Eastern countries are managing to penetrate successfully the Western market, while the other way around is not really happening. It's just happening with a very few games, with giants like Supercell, for example. How do you avoid CPI increase as you scale your UA budgets? Basically, that's a UA manager question, and yeah, CPI, for example, at A Thinking Ape games, at strategy games, CPI has always been high, and basically, yeah, part of how do you avoid CPI increase is you make a different country mix. So that graph I showed you at the end is that 2 years ago it was 65% USA users, now it's 24%. So obviously USA CPI is one of the highest ones and one of the most expensive ones. So Smart UA has managed, while still targeting high spenders in USA, to make a bigger percentage of the pie chart, a better country mix, basically, to basically decrease their CPI while still having top performing results. Other question is, what do you think of hyper casual genre in the upcoming feature? Hyper casual is out there for a while, and it has been performing super well, but it's a slippery slope. Like, people in the industry are saying that hyper casual is dying out, and it probably is. But even if it's not, you have to be very careful with these games. Very, very, very small percentage of them manages to like hit the charts and make some serious ROIs. It's like companies like Ketchup and Voodoo and newer companies that are doing that. They're like successfully doing that for a year and a half, and then basically they don't exist anymore. But even them, like, think about how they work. They have thousands of people who make hyper casual games feeding them, and they just cherry pick the best ones and give them the chance on the market. And even most of them that are cherry picked don't actually hit the top charts. So it's a very hard genre to actually make it profitable and make it right. I'd say it's equally hard to work on 50 hyper casual games over the span of 2 years, or make like 2 midcore games in that same time, whereas midcore has a lot more stable market, and like, if you know what you're doing, there is a much better chance to actually make your game profitable.